Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Robin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Sure. I'm Robin Strom. I am the director of Delaware Paranormal Research Group, which is a group that's been around since about 2008. I'm also the author of a couple of books on the paranormal, On the Hunt for the Haunted, Searching for Proof of the Paranormal is a book about all of our past investigations, or not all of them, but many of them. And then Anatomy of a Ghost, a guide to analyzing the dead is kind of it's actually my first book. It's kind of an overarching look at a lot of things to do with the paranormal and hauntings and ghosts in particular, but also near death experiences and out of body experiences and tulpas and man-made ghosts and all sorts of stuff.
So now, have you always had an interest in the paranormal, or did it start when the team started in '08?
I have always kind of been interested in the paranormal and all things macabre. I had a grandmother that was very interested in it as well. So I kind of grew up with that interest. But for me, I never had any paranormal experiences, oddly enough. So um, to me, ghost stories were just that. They were just ghost stories because I'd never had any experiences or anything out of the ordinary happen to me. Um, and then it really piqued my interest when I moved into an old Victorian.
It's always an old Victorian. It's
It's
always an old
always an old.
Victorian.
Oh God, I love that house. So for many reasons, but one in particular, that it was haunted by a child ghost. So we moved into the house, and the very first night we didn't have any furniture or anything. So I bedded my 2-year-old down. He was 2 at the time, so it's been a while. You can see. Um, so I bedded him down in a first floor bedroom on the floor in a nest of blankets and pillows and all that kind of stuff. And then my husband and I, after a long day of unpacking and cleaning and all that kind of stuff, we bedded down in the formal parlor. So we're sound asleep because we're exhausted. And about midnight, I get woken up. And I open my eyes and I look up, and there's a child staring at me. Now it's dark, so I just assumed the child was my son. The child proceeded to get up and like skipped on down the hallway back towards the bedroom. Now my son's 2, maybe 2.5 at this point. So you don't let 2.5-year-olds, out of your sight for very long. So I can't hear him. And I'm calling him like, where are you, darling? Come, what you doing? And I'm not hearing anything. I'm like, well, I better go check on him because he's going to be up to no good. So I go down the hall to the bedroom where I had put him down, and he's sound asleep. And I'm just standing there going, what just happened? Because as I said, I'd never had any experiences in my life. So I was completely nonplussed, to say the least.
So, did you look into the history behind the house to try and figure out if you could find something, maybe like obviously the child, about that the Victorian home being haunted by a child ghost. So, I mean, did you look into the history and find that there was a person who either died at that place or something?
No, because this was long before I actually got into the paranormal. So, yeah, this is about 4 or 5 years before that. So, and I was just starting a professorship at a 4-year college. So I was busy, busy, busy. I was scrambling. So, and we were redoing the house. So, I mean, I was just, the paranormal was just secondary at that point. It was just, I'm too busy to deal with this right now. So, so no, I never actually looked into the history of the house, except that it had been owned by it wasn't a funeral parlor, but it was owned by the family that owned the funeral parlor in the town. So that's about all I knew about it. But I mean, it was pre Civil War construction, so it had been around a while, a long while. So
Now, did when you started looking into the paranormal, did you try and look at other people's claims of things? Like, what's your idea of a ghost as well, too? Like, do you think it's like a memory? I've heard that before. Honestly, I believe that one a little bit more. But then some people have different ideas of what they would constitute as a paranormal or an apparition or ghost.
Yeah, well, it's a complicated subject, which is primarily why I went into it. But certainly, I've run into things that are residual in nature, and I've kind of developed a theory actually about doppelgangers being kind of a residual of the living, if you will, because if the environment can record people from the past, it's quite possible that it can also record people from the future. So there's a case in point. There was a young man. I heard him on the Jim Harold Campfire podcast, but it was really great, a great example. So the young man is in the kitchen one day, and he's making a sandwich, and he looks up, and this small child runs into the room, takes one look at him, and runs out of the room. And he's like, "Who in the heck was that?" And then he remembered that when he was a small boy, he went into the kitchen one day and saw a strange teenager making a sandwich, got scared, and ran out. So he had literally seen himself at two different times in his life.
Like a loop. Yeah.
Like a loop. Exactly. Exactly. And there was another one. I don't remember where this one was from, but it was a woman, and she was home, and she heard very distinctly herself call out to her from downstairs, like in the basement. She's like, so she goes looking for someone. She doesn't find anyone. She's alone in the house, and it sounded distinctly like herself. Fast forward a few years, and she's down in the basement. She remembered that time, and so she called out to herself, and she realized that what she had heard in the past was herself in the future calling out to herself in the past. So I mean, fascinating. Those are fascinating examples. So
It can make your mind go through loops on that one. That seems a little bit complicated for me.
yeah, yeah. Well, you know, spend enough time in this field, you realize that time really is not linear. It's not.
Yeah, there's
We
multiple
perceive it
theories
that
of it.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so maybe what we perceive as ghosts is that are actually not ghosts. They're just in their time frame, operating, doing their thing, and then at times maybe the veil thins, as they say, and we can, two times can kind of coincide.
Well, I believe like the residual energy is the thing that like a place could experience so much trauma or pain. Like some of those like Alcatraz and all those places where there's been horrible deaths. And I would think that obviously we're energy, in my opinion. I think that we're energy. And I just think that some of that dissipates and then it gets stained in a place depending on what horrors happen there. I mean, sometimes it can be a good memory too.
It doesn't even need to be something traumatic. We always want it to be something traumatic, but I've had my own doppelganger experiences in my house. I've been in my house for 18 years, along with my son and my husband. So I'm home one day. My son was gone, and I hear him. He has a very distinct "hey." He says when he's entering a room or he's calling you. So I hear "hey" in his voice, and I'm like, he's not home. So I just assumed it was my husband who was working down in the basement. But an hour or so later, my husband comes home or comes up from the basement. He said, "Is your son home?" And I said, "No, he's not home." And he said, "That's odd because I heard him say, 'hey.'" So we both heard it. We both knew it sounded distinctly like my son, but he wasn't home. So it can just be mundane. You live in a building or you work in a building for long enough, some part of you can get recorded into the fabric. And certainly, something traumatic would probably expedite that as well. But as I say, it does not need to be traumatic for it to happen. So
Now, through your paranormal research or just like looking deeper into it, not before the team even started, but just having an interest in it, did you try to look at other people's experiences? Like I'm sure there's forums and things of that sort that could be able to give you a good collection of information on some people's paranormal encounters, experiences, or some other things that might be able to pique your interest as well. Like you just explained a couple examples right there. That's stuff I've never heard of before. So I've always heard of like apparitions or people going in, like someone being able to turn a light on and off or something that simple that I've seen guests showing me on the show before. But I'm curious, like, where do you, like, how do you trust the source and then how do you not trust the source?
Yeah, that's isn't that
Because
always the
the
case?
X Files completely ruined everything. They completely just made everything like ridiculous and crazy. And I love that show. I watched it as a kid, but from people that like I saw some of the locations they went to and investigated, and some of those people that work at that facility or place, either it's a prison or something of that sort. There's a penitentiary in Virginia I had spoken to a guy about, and he was like, yeah, he goes, on the sixth day, they didn't have any shots or anything shot for the thing. And they asked me if I could do this one thing to make it look like this. And then they chopped it a certain way and played it to make it sound like there was an encounter. And I was like, that's the thing. How do you know what's real? I mean, I think everyone has like a little bit of themselves to know that inside them they believe in the paranormal, just because we don't know. It's like saying there's no aliens or anything. Space is so vast. Doesn't matter if they came here already, despite what the government says. It's just space is so vast to say that there is no existence would just be simple.
Yeah, that would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? I mean, it's infinite. So, and obviously there are other solar systems out there that are capable of, you know, creating a habitable, if that's a word, planet. You know, but I think it's more right now. The consensus is more that they're interdimensional, so they're not traveling a gazillion years through space to get here. They're coming through in another dimension. So I think that's kind of the prevailing thought right now.
I believe I had Nick Pope on here from Ancient Aliens, and I told him, I said, I just don't believe what the government says. I don't know. For so long, they denied the UAP stuff, and then finally now they're acknowledging it. And I'm like, why all of a sudden now
I
they
know, it makes you
acknowledge it?
wonder, doesn't it?
Well,
Yeah.
I hope it opens up the door to paranormal discussions too. Like, does that mean the government's going to start investigating those claims a little bit more? They've done it in the past.
Well, actually, I don't, it wasn't actually, it was the Pentagon that launched an investigation at Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, that's my buddy TJ's show.
Yeah, yeah, because they wanted to possibly, well, they wanted to figure out what was going on so they could use it as a weapon. Only the government would take
I
the.
know. I go right to the weapon side of things.
Yeah, yeah. So, but there's been some speculation, at least, that, well, I mean, the Russians were doing the remote viewing,
Yeah.
testing the remote viewing as well as we were. So,
We try to create psychological warriors in our government. It was Project Jedi.
mm-hmm.
So there is obviously something going on that is a little bit deeper. Like it doesn't need to go into the conspiracy realm, like people always toss it into the fantasy thing. Like I'm interested in cryptids and all those discussions, and I have friends that research them. I mean, they come with a lot of evidence and stuff to support a lot of their points. And I just mentioned, I was like, to say that this is all life is, you're living and then you're gone. I was like, there has to be something else. We don't knock religious claims. People don't do that. But then when we get into the paranormal discussions and other things, it's like, oh, everyone just kind of either scoffs it off or everyone has an interest in it. I feel like everyone has that little bit of curiosity.
Definitely. And, I spent a lot of years just doing hauntings and ghosts and poltergeists and that kind of thing. And I just, I got bored with it after a while. So I started looking into other, like cryptids and
Yeah.
Bigfoot claims and, all that. And I'm like, my God, the world is
It's
it's
got a
a
lot of secrets.
crazy, crazy place. Yeah. When you start looking into the wide variety of paranormal events, it's
What what
mind boggling.
what caused you in '08 to start your paranormal research team?
Well, as I said, I was always really, really interested in the paranormal, and I had those experiences in my house. There were numerous of them, but the boy ghost being just the most traumatic. But and then I was cruising the television stations one day, and I came across a Ghost Hunters show, and I'm like, my God, if two plumbers can investigate the paranormal, certainly I can. So I was just hooked. My son was old enough at that point to, that I could I could leave them home with a sitter and not have to worry about them. And, my time was a bit freed up from where I had been. And so I joined actually, I contacted a paranormal group and I said, I really want to join. And I didn't hear anything back. And then I filled out their application and I sent it in and I didn't hear anything back. And then I contacted them again and I'm like, I really want to join, and I didn't hear anything back. And I'm finally like, I will run a podcast, I will do your video, I will, I just started throwing everything at the wall. I'm like, I want in. I'm sure there's never been anyone in the history of mankind that wanted in that badly. But I just kept at them until they let me in. So
Now, how'd you find people for your team? Like, how'd you decide that you wanted to start it up, make a website for it and also do some investigations, which we're going to get into, but that's not an easy thing. Like, I have friends that are like Bump in the Night Society, that's their team, and they openly talk about it. They openly go like that. And I'm like, I don't know. For me, I don't know if I'd be able to, because I feel like there's a stigma behind being on like saying that you're investigating stuff like that. Cause still people kind of don't believe some of this stuff either.
yeah, the television shows have gone a long way towards changing, I think, the public opinion. Because I remember when I started in this, I was very careful about who I told that I did this on the side. Now I just let it all hang out because everyone wants to talk about their paranormal experiences. So it's shocking how much it's changed in the last 15 years. Now, I still run across the occasional person, but it's nothing like it used to be. It really isn't. So, in fact, most of the time, people are more than willing to come up and bend my ear for hours, telling about every experience they've ever had. So,
You find that everyone has a paranormal experience. That's the crazy thing. Like, everyone has something they can't
a
explain.
lot of them,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So,
Now, what's some of the investigations you went on? Like, what was your first investigation? I mean, you're a state away from me. You're in Delaware. I'm in Maryland, so it's nice to have someone that's, on the East Coast. Usually, I'm talking to someone from another country or something. But what was one of your first investigations you decided to go
yes.
on?
So here's I always call it my grimoire. Actually, it was the first 10 years of investigating. Every one of them is logged in here. So it's invaluable. If the house burns down, I'm going in for my logbook. Screw the photos. So it was the Mitchell house. That was up in it's Elkton, Maryland. I wrote it down. Mitchell House in Elkton, Maryland. It was a really old house with a barn, I believe. It was like a historic property. It was cool. It's cool.
Did you find anything paranormal there?
Oh, God, this is 2008.
How did you wait? How did you find the places that are haunted in like the first place? That was, I mean, the internet was still a thing, but I just think a lot of people aren't just publicizing that they have a haunted location.
Yeah, not back then, especially. But I didn't run the group at that time, so I'm not sure how the two gentlemen that ran the group found them. But apparently, it wasn't the first time that they'd done this one, so they had a contact with them. So, I mean, there are a couple of different ways that you can go about finding investigations. You can contact places, right, and ask them to investigate. I know the newest and greatest thing is to break into empty buildings and investigate. I do not suggest doing that.
That's
for a number of
illegal.
reasons. Yeah, it's illegal, number one. It's really dangerous, number two. If you fall through the floor, no one's going to know where you're at. So I always dissuade people from doing that. But I know that's all the rage right now. But we've been out for a long time. People come to me now. So they'll come to me and say, hey, I've got a haunted location, and could you come out and check it out? So that's the way we get our investigations now. I don't have to.
Do you trust more of the commercial or the residential ones?
I tend to trust the commercial ones more. I've come across a lot of
Interesting folk. I got you.
there you go. Yeah. So but I always, if it sounds credible enough, I always go out and I do a walkthrough, talk to the family, and if I think they're credible, I might set something up. If I think they need a bit more evidence before I'm hooked, then I suggest that they log and get back to me if they, come up with something really juicy. So, for example, in my book, On the Hunt for the Haunted, I talk about Hartley House. We did Hartley House 3 times. Now, the first time they had it investigated, I took a pass on it. I didn't think there was enough there. But then they brought another team out. They did an investigation, a short one, found some interesting things. And then Lindsay, the homeowner, contacted me again. She's like, would you consider coming out now? And I'm like, yeah, I'll come out because you've got something there for me to see, something tangible. So, and as I said, we did that house 3 times. We never did an investigation at that house that we did not get not only something, but a plethora of something. It was just an amazing property.
Now, is that one of the locations, or is there another location that you have that really sticks out in your mind as like, I'll never forget this?
Oh yeah, probably the Lewis investigation, the Long Neck investigation that I wrote about in the book because it was just such an incredible investigation. But there'd been an older gentleman that had owned the house. Apparently he was just a horrible human being. Yeah, his obituary was like, Joe died. He worked at X. And that was it. I'm like, no one in the world had a good thing to say about the man. So, he was a really bad diabetic. He was in a wheelchair for the last few years of his life, and he had a recliner that he basically lived in. So he would sleep in the recliner. He would spend all day in his recliner. The neighbor would come over and check on him to make sure he wasn't in a diabetic coma. And then eventually he passed away. He had left the property to a woman, acquaintance of his. Apparently she didn't want it. So she just never moved in, never paid the taxes, and it just went up for auction eventually. So this unwitting woman bought the property. She was going to completely renovate it, add a couple of additions, just doing a beautiful job on the place. Of course, because the man had died basically in the house and the woman had never moved in, everything that the man had owned, including that old recliner, was still in the house. So the woman moves in, she's renovating it with her boyfriend, and all sorts of crazy stuff starts going on. Basically, the spirit did not want them working on his house, which you hear a lot. So they eventually called me in because they were just getting freaked out. And we walk in, my co-director and I walk in, and we do a walkthrough. I took one look at the recliner. It's full of cigarette holes, cigarette burns, and dirty and filthy and tattered. And he explained to me that this had been the gentleman's recliner. And I said, oh, okay.
That's probably the most haunted thing in that place.
Mm-hmm. So as I'm walking out, I said to him, I don't remember his name now, but I said to him, you might want to get rid of the recliner. And he's like, you mean like burn it? Now, remember, this is his girlfriend's house. So everything in the house is his girlfriend's. It's not his. And I'm like, I don't want to tell you to, and she wasn't there, by the way, she was out of town. So I'm like, I'm not telling you to burn her furniture, even though it's a nasty old piece of furniture. I said, why don't you just put it on the curb? And he said, well, what happens if someone else takes it? And I'm like, well, then they're going to have a
just toss them.
They're going to have
on that thing.
Yeah. So we are actually pulling out of the property, and he is just running into the house, and I see him in the rear view mirror hauling this recliner out to the fire pit. So he burnt the recliner. Luckily his girlfriend was not mad. As I say, it was a nasty old piece of furniture anyway, but and he swore up and down that when he burned the recliner, he could see the image of a man and a little girl in the flames. So he videotaped taped it for me and he sent it to me. I never could see what he was seeing, but he swore up and down, and his father swore up and down because his father lived next door, that they could see this image of a man and a little girl in the flames. So after that, the scarier things that were going on in the house pretty much ceased.
Is
So
is that a
I
way to get
nailed
rid of
that
it?
one.
Is that a way to get rid of it by burning
Well,
like a
if it's a
material possession?
if it's if the if the object is haunted, yeah, you get rid of it.
I would feel like the energy wouldn't just go into something else. Like what would stop it from going into something else in that house? It just had to be attached to that one thing.
I don't know. Honestly. I just knew it worked, and we released him out to the outside. I mean, this one was a wild ride. So also in the house was supposedly a little girl ghost, and they would find like happy faces drawn on in the dust and on the in the paint and all over the house. So there was a little girl ghost, and there was a older, like Victorian style woman.
Always a Victorian style something.
Yeah, but this was a house built in the 70s. That was the interesting thing. And the boyfriend would see this female apparition. He'd see her almost on a nightly basis. She would always move from one bedroom, float across, because he said she didn't walk. She kind of, the head didn't go up and down like you do when you walk. It would just float by. And it would go into the other bedroom, and he'd go in the other bedroom and he wouldn't see anything. And then the next night, the same thing would happen. So when we burned the chair, we got rid of the gentleman, the older gentleman, but it was still very haunted by the little girl ghost and the older lady ghost. So before we left, we suggested, because the woman that owned the property just wanted to be done with it. So we suggested that ways to cleanse the property. And I always tell people, you bring out pest control to spray the property, you're going to get rid of a lot of the bugs, but you're not going to get rid of every bug. So when you're cleansing a property, if you're smudging, for example, you might, just because you do it once doesn't mean you've gotten all the bugs, right?
Yeah.
So
it's like Germex, 99.9% is what they say.
yeah, so we had her on a regimen. So she was smudging the property on a daily basis for about a week. And then it was, once a week. And then eventually she got it down to once a month. But, and eventually she wasn't having any more activity in the house whatsoever. So, but the really interesting thing was I had a male investigator on the team at that time. He was getting on a flight to go to Texas, and the woman sat down next to him, and she was asking. She said, "What do you do for a living, or basically, what do you do for a hobby?" And he's like, this was back when you didn't want to talk about it, so he's kind of like, "Oh, I go out with a group of folks and do some stuff." But she kept at him. She's like, "What do you do for a hobby? What do you do on the side? What do you do for a hobby?" And he finally's like, "I investigate the paranormal." She said, "I thought so." And then she said, I'll never forget this, "They live outside now."
Jesus, that's something you don't want to remember. Oh my God.
So yes, so she was a very strong psychic, and she picked up on the fact that they had moved out. They had moved outside. So that was incredible.
You've investigated a lot of places, but I think we briefly talked about this on email, but did you investigated the Atlantic Hotel?
Yes, we did. That was one of my favorites.
Haunted or not?
Oh, totally.
Okay, because I've explained my paranormal experience on the show before in the past. And like I said, it's when you say it, like for me, I don't know, that's like my weird stuff. I'm like, there you go, there's that. Let's put that out in the ether. But I'll give you like a breakdown of it. But I was in the Atlantic Hotel. I was probably maybe 7, 8 years old, maybe younger than that. But my mom worked there at the time, and so did my aunt. And so I was sick from school, and sick when I mean like I was just playing it up a little bit. And I was I remember exactly I was watching Scooby Doo on the TV, and this maid had come by. It was an African American lady, and she was wearing like an older maid outfit. And she just kind of said, "Are you hungry?" And I said, "No, my mom told me to stay in here, watch TV, watch Scooby Doo. If I need anything, I can, when she comes up, I'll let her know, but thank you." And she was like, "Okay." And then like gave me a wave and then started walking down the hallway. And then of course, I waited a couple minutes and then I hop out of bed real fast and I run over, look down the hallway and try and see. And she was gone. And I ran downstairs and I was like, you know what? I am kind of hungry now. So I went downstairs and told my mom and my aunt, and they kind of just stared at me. And I was like, "Yeah, is everything okay?"
It's my snacks. Yeah.
And they were like, "There's nobody else working here but me, your aunt, and then either it's his name was Bob or something that's in the kitchen." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "I saw someone." So, and then after that, like I just like I said, I was little. That's all I remember about that. But I don't know if you came across anything, and I'm curious what your investigative, what you could be able to find.
I didn't see a full body apparition. I wish I had, but that is amazing. And there's another story I heard about the Atlantic that's similar to that one, where the manager is at the Atlantic, and this woman who's supposedly in that tiny little room right over the kitchen. It's been years now, but D something. But anyway, there's this tiny little room over the kitchen, so it's not a great room, because you get the kitchen noise. It's so small you can't even. I don't think there's another piece of furniture in it except the bed. There was a dresser, but I mean, it's tiny. Anyway, I digress. So apparently, this woman comes out of this little room, which is extremely haunted, by the way. She comes out, she walks up to the manager and she says, "There's no towels in my room." And the manager's like, "Oh, we made up the room. It's not possible you wouldn't have any towels." And the woman's like, "I don't have any towels in my room." She said, "Well, you should have one or two." And she goes, "You don't understand. I have no towels in my room." And then she turns around and goes back into the room and closes the door. The manager's like, "Well, I better get her some towels." She's mad. So she runs to the linen closet, grabs a bunch of towels, goes to the room and knocks on the door. And she doesn't get a response. So she's standing out there with these towels and she knocks on the door. She doesn't get any response. Finally, she tries the door. It's not locked. She kind of opens it, and says, "Ma'am, I've got your towels. I've got your towels, ma'am. Where are you?" The room's completely empty and there's towels. So she could never explain.
Did you come across a lot that hotels were surprisingly, a lot of them were might be haunted? There's always, I used to work at a hotel and I was very surprised. Like once I started doing the podcast and everything, I would talk to people that worked at a hotel because I've come across, I think, 4 deaths when I worked at a hotel. Dunes Manor in Ocean City. It's a largely older clientele that comes there, but there was 4 deaths in that 4 years that I worked there. Um, and I've started realizing that a lot of people that work at hotels, especially older ones that are kind of like routine vacation spots for a lot of folks that go there either during winter, during the holidays, whatever you want to say, that they would come across either a death or something throughout their experience there. And I'd have to think these places would have to have some type of energy or residual energy in them, especially with some of the graphic ones. When I was working there, one person had tied bed sheets around their neck and tied it to the railing and jumped. And it was a younger person too. It wasn't an older person. But I was like, oh, like that stuff. Like now when I go, I don't even go to hotels anymore. I'm like, no, and you don't hear about it as much because of the fact that it would be very bad publicity for a hotel to have that a death happened at their thing. So it's kind of like a little bit unheard of unless you talk to actual workers there.
Yeah. Yeah. Michelle Belanger, the author, had a theory about, she actually worked at a hotel. She worked nights at a hotel and it was extremely haunted. And it was just like just your run of the mill,
It's never run of the mill. It's
right
never
off
run of
the
the mill.
highway. Yeah. Well, it wasn't an Atlantic, it was just one of those generic chain hotels off the highway. So she would work nights and she would have all sorts of, crazy stuff happen. And she is finally came to the conclusion that hotels are where people go to commit suicide because they don't want their family finding them, or they want peace and quiet while they, pull the plug basically. And so there had been several suicides in that hotel. It was, as I say, it was right off the highway, and that, they would be driving along thinking about ending themselves, and see the hotel, and oh, that's perfect. So so that was her theory as to why hotels are so often haunted. And then, you can die of natural causes as well, like the older hotel that you were talking about with the clientele that's older. I do have to tell you about one hotel that I was at, and it was not for an investigation. Actually, it was for a paranormal convention. It's the um, Eisenhower Hotel in Gettysburg. Gettysburg, crazy, right? But so we were at this paranormal convention, just this crazy hotel. They had let it get completely run down. The roof was leaking like a sieve, and so they had stopped using the second floor entirely. Instead of fixing the roof, rather, they just let those rooms go to pot basically. And of course, the weekend we were there, it was raining cats and dogs. So I have to, I have to wander. I mean,
I'm
an
with you.
abandoned second floor in a rainstorm. Hello, I'm there. So I actually took my shoes off because I wanted to see just how wet the place was. But so I'm walking along this deserted hallway area, and there's just puddles of water. All the rooms are closed and locked up tight. It's dark up there because they're not running the lights, probably an electrical hazard. But so it was just a spooky place. They've since fixed it up, by the way. But so I'm up there by myself, and I turn the corner, and I'm coming down this one hallway, and in this room I'm hearing bam, bam, bam. It's like someone's having a temper tantrum in there. And I'm like, I know the room is empty. They're all empty up here. So I put my ear to the door, and I'm like, is someone in there? And I get no answer. And I'm like, all right, this is too bizarre. So I go down and I get my co-director. We were staying in the same room, and I think I took a EMF detector because you never go out without one, right? So, and we head back up to this room, and my co-director was she was pretty sensitive to energies. So even before I told her what was going on, because I wanted an unbiased opinion, am I nuts or is this actually happening? So we approached the room, and even before we got to the room, she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, I can feel it. And then the EMF detector starts going off, and we creep up to the door, and sure enough, bam, smash, drag sounds, just like someone's just having a bit of anger in there. Like, wow, that is nuts. So that was probably one of the wildest things that ever happened to me in a hotel. And it wasn't even on investigation. I always wanted to go back to that hotel and get that actual room rented for the night. So
Do you not have a fear of anything paranormal? I mean, obviously, there's some serious stuff that happens, and it can be scary. I mean, that situation you just explained can be scary as well, too. A lot of people wouldn't want to go investigate deeper. But I mean, do you ever have any like no-goes when it comes to some things in the paranormal?
I don't.
If it's in the middle of the woods, I'm not going. I'll tell you that
Oh,
much.
really? I'm all in. uh, demonics, I think. I have no interest in getting into that. I think you're foolish to get into that unless you've been trained and you know what you're doing. I see far too many people bumbling into this that are just simply not prepared, and you don't want to bring something like that down on yourself.
You talking
So,
about like Ouija boards and things of that sort?
oh, I'm talking about groups that decide that they're going to do exorcisms and just trot on out there. And yeah, I had a group set up in Delaware, for example, and they came up to me at a paranormal convention and they're like, well, we want you to send all of your dark investigations to us. And because we're demon hunters or we're exorcists. And I'm like, oh, really? What are your qualifications?
Aren't they? Isn't that dangerous to be an exorcist?
Yeah. Yeah. It's very dangerous. And actually the only organization that's supposed to be able to do exorcisms is of course the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Um, so as I say, I find those people really, really foolish because it can it can come back to haunt you,
Yeah.
as it were. So yeah, I don't tend when I do come across something that's really dark. I've actually never actually done an investigation. We had one that was I'm not sure it was a demon, but it was definitely not nice. So I went for the walkthrough with the gentleman, and he was doing poltergeist like activity, like slamming doors and knocking things off shelves and throwing things. I mean, it was pretty crazy activity going on. So we're doing the walkthrough and we're sitting at the table and I'm doing an interview with the gentleman, just finding out what's going on. And all of a sudden I get this like frigid cold, hair in the back of your neck standing up, staticky, crazy staticky feeling. And I mean, I get this, when I'm investigating, but this just lasted and lasted and lasted and lasted. It felt like someone was like leaning down on my back. And finally, and I never do this, I finally stopped the investigation, just stopped talking, looked down at the table, and I said, get off me now. And it backed off and it left me alone. So we finish up the walkthrough and I go home and I'm having, and there's something that, in the poltergeist called contagion, where if you investigate something of a darker nature, it can follow you home and affect you, which is what the investigators at Skinwalker Ranch found as well. So I got home and for no apparent reason, I'm getting the chills in the back, the hair on the back of the neck standing up, and just crazy chills. And I'm in my home. It's not haunted. There's nothing going on. It's just the fact that I had been out and was dealing with this thing and it followed me home. I called my co-director. First, I smudged myself. I got some sage and I had my husband smudge me. Never do that either. I never do things like
I
that.
can't stand the smell of sage.
Yeah, I hate sage on top of everything else. But so I had him smudge me and I was much better. Called my co-director. She had the same experience. So she had gotten home. Actually, she said in the car she was having those experiences. So it was a pretty powerful, pretty dark entity. Unfortunately, we were all set up to do the investigation, and the gentleman worked out of town. He actually worked in Washington, D.C. So so kind of fell through because he got really busy with work and I never heard from him again, actually. But I was a little worried about that one, to be quite honest.
Do you find that a lot of the paranormal discussions get brought into like the religious side of things or like demonic stuff? And I've had a few people when they're talking about paranormal stuff, they start going into some of the religious stuff. And I mean, I don't know if that's just Hollywood. I mean, look at everything we see on TV when it comes to like a paranormal thing. It ends up going into like demonic or it goes into something like that, unless it's a TV show.
It's the fad right now. The demonic, the whole demonic thing is a fad. It started out with ghosts, but eventually, that's just not spooky enough. So they've just gone full tilt demonic. And 99.9% of the cases I've ever investigated have not been demonic, that they are not as prevalent as the television shows make it out to be. So thankfully, because you don't want that many demonics.
Yeah.
So don't never believe the television shows. They're for entertainment's sake. So I'm actually an agnostic, and which is one of the reasons I went into the paranormal, because I had a desire to know what happened to us when we died. And I didn't find the answers in religion. They were always just like, well, just have blind faith. And I'm like, I'm not a blind faith kind of
Yeah.
person, so I want some evidence. And that's, and honestly, that's why I've been in the paranormal field for so long. I didn't go into it for thrills. I didn't go into it for a television contract. I didn't go into it to make myself famous. I went into it, and this is why people that do this stay, because I had answers that I wanted to have, that I wanted, mysteries that I wanted answered. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, since you've been involved in it for a while, you're seasoned in the kind of the community when it comes to paranormal research. But do you have any obviously positives or negative outlooks on the paranormal research thing? Like, to me, I've seen everything go so commercial, and obviously we saw that with X-Files and Ghost Hunters and all that, which is why I like to talk to independent people like yourself who have their own teams and run their own stuff, because it's more of a like, you'll tell me what's real, you'll tell me what you saw, you'll tell me if you didn't find anything. But if I interview someone on one of these like I've interviewed people on X-Files, they just kind of, they hype it up and make it sound like, yeah, you'll have to see it on my next episode. I was like, what
oh yeah,
what?
yeah.
Just tell me what you saw. That's all I'm asking. But I've noticed that like the whole kind of culture has kind of shifted more towards like, now there's like some of these places they charge like $3,000 for you to go investigate it with your team. And I'm like, well, hang on a second. Like, I get everyone needs to make some money on some things, but also people aren't trying to break the bank, just trying to quench their own curiosity of if there is an afterlife and if there is something here.
Yeah. Yeah. It has gone terribly commercial. I've gone to, I actually stopped going to paranormal conventions because they just became so unbearable. I'd get vendor space, or I'd do a talk in one of these places that would have the television personalities, and the entire audience would be over on the other side of the room. And, you'd just be sitting there by yourself with your books. It's like, I got so sick of it. I'm sick of the pomposity, the wandering around the room with the telephone to the ear, negotiating next year's contract. I'm just like, get over yourself. We're all
Yeah.
we put our pants on in the same way, one leg at a time. So, yeah. So as I say, I finally, I'm like, I'm done with this. I am done with you. I'm done with this whole. I'll have people come up to me and say, "Oh, I watch all those paranormal shows. What's your favorite?" And I'm like, I don't watch any of them.
Good for
They're like,
you.
what are you talking about? I'm like, I don't watch any of them, not one anymore. It's just, they got so ridiculous and so over the top. And as they say, the pomposity is just,
Does
so
that
yeah.
Do you think that brings a bigger stigma on the paranormal research, like from the public's perception of things?
Well, no, I don't think the public understands. That's why I always tell them, television is for entertainment. It is not research. It is not real. When they aren't getting anything, they make up their own evidence. It is not real. Not only that, but they're not looking. Did the reason the door bang open because of the windstorm that was going on the top of the mountain, or was it actually a ghost? I don't know. What do you think? That's just, don't get me started.
No, it's
But
it's real serious about it, because I think that obviously it became profitable for some things like that, and
it
people have
became
an
very profitable. That's for
yeah,
sure.
and people have an interest in it. But I wonder if that it's kind of like when I'm interested in the JFK stuff. I'm a researcher over it. I've had federal judges and people who actually did the investigation that'll tell you a different story than what gets told. And I've looked through so many documents where it's a passion of mine. But then when I see someone make a documentary and they really try and hype it up, even Oliver Stone has done it. I'm like, look, I get it that it's a Hollywood movie, but to me, it just does it a bigger disservice. Like, as a public, I feel like we're okay if you show us something that we didn't find anything. I'm okay as a person. I feel in my heart that if I saw something, a paranormal show, and they're like, hey, we didn't find anything this time around, I'm like, get them next time, like, keep going with it. I prefer to get the facts, not the Hollywood side of things.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, and we've done investigations where we have gotten absolutely nothing. So it's always a bummer, but it's a possibility. So,
But you got to love the experience with your team, though, when you go, even if you guys don't find anything, just that whole experience of being together on
yeah, but you have to fight the urge. My co-director in particular was a chatty Kathy, so
it.
she'd give it about 5 minutes, and then she's off talking about something completely different, and the horses and her granddaughter and blah 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 blah. I'm like, Rennie, you got to be quiet once in a while. We're supposed to be here to observe and listen. You haven't heard a thing. So, but sometimes though, ironically, that will work in your favor. When you're actively out there trying to get their attention, trying to interact with them, if they don't want to interact with you, you're not going to get them to interact with you. But when you stop being interested in them and ignore them, that's usually when you get the most activity, because they're like, hey, did you forget about me? So it's very much like that. So
That
she'd be off talking about horses, and all of a sudden the EMF detector would just go crazy, and it's like, what happened?
what are some of the reliable equipment you use to be able to detect them?
Well, we use um we use a lot of video, IR cameras. I have a oh god, I think I have a 4 camera surveillance system that's IR, and then I've got 4 Panasonics that are IR. I've got a GoPro that's a full spectrum, and another GoPro that's, I've been doing this a long time. I got far too much equipment. I have like 6 audio recorders. I buy the expensive ones, the nice Zoom ones, which
Yeah.
is ironic because I can't use Zoom. But
I have a Zoom recorder. That was my first recorder.
oh, I love Zooms. I
That
love
took me a while to figure out. I could tell you that much. They don't make it easy. It looks like you just hit this and hit this. No, it's all
no.
complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have 5 of the H4Ns, which are a
Oh
little
my
older
God.
technology. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I have a cheaper Zoom as well. So the Zooms were made for recording in musical recordings.
Yeah.
So they're really beautiful microphones. So recorders. So yeah, we have a bunch of those. We have REM pods, of course. Although I try to be careful with the REM pods because they can give you lots of false positives, which is something else they don't tell you on television, by the way. If you make a telephone call with a REM pod in the room, it will set the REM pod off. Landlines, that is. I have never been able to do it with my cell phone, but my landline. Walkie talkies will set the REM pod off. When they get low on batteries, the REM pod will go off. In a rainstorm, the REM pod is going to go off. In a windstorm, the REM pod's going to go off. How often do you hear that when you're watching like a YouTube video
Well,
right?
how hard is that going to be to try and have the perfect conditions to use a REM pod if it has all those things to it that can mess it with it?
Yeah, you have to be really careful. You can't use your walkie-talkies around the REM pods. It was so ironic because I was giving a talk to students at First State Military Academy because we've done a couple of investigations over there, and they've been watching a lot of television shows, and so they were asking about the ghost box and the SD method and the REM pods, and so I brought a REM pod and I had it on and I was showing them, and I'm in the middle of my talk, and we had just talked about false positives and the fact that you have to be very, very careful about this, and the REM pod starts going off and it will not stop. And the kid, smart kid, turns around, and sure enough, there are 2 or 3 students walking by, and they had just been on their walkie-talkies because it's a military academy. So they were out doing drills with their walkie-talkies, and it had set the REM pod off. And I'm like, perfect points. So perfect way to drill it home. So you have to be really, really careful about things like that. REM pods, ghost boxes. I know, as I say, you never hear about that on television, but you never want to use one of those and assume it's completely accurate because there's a whole lot that can set it off.
Do you trust the newer technology? I think there was like a spirit box a buddy of mine was mentioning that was like a good chunk of money to get the thing. And I'm like, I don't know I don't know why they raised the prices so high on half of that equipment.
Oh, because it's commercialized. So yeah, I don't know if the spirit box is the thing where you see the stick figures, but that's actually a gaming system, and it's designed to find things in the environment that take on a human form, because it was like it was to be a gaming system, like, you know, if you were playing tennis with the television. So it is trained, you know, it's designed to find things that look like a human form. So if you're in a room and there isn't another human being in the room, it will make a stick figure on the couch, because it sees the couch and it's roughly human shaped. So then all of a sudden you've got a stick figure on your screen and you're assuming it's a ghost. It's the couch. It's the refrigerator. It's the, you know, the armoire in the corner. It's not, it's the machine's doing what it's designed to do. So we don't use those ever. I never used ghost boxes. I had a teammate that just loved her ghost box. And I was forever getting into debates with her, because what does this ghost box do? It scans radio waves. Well, what are
Yeah.
on radio waves? Radio stations. So when it chirps out something, it's a radio station. It is not the spirit. Or if it is a spirit, how am I going to determine what is a spirit and what's a radio station? You can?
I'm
I
with you
can't,
on that.
except,
I'm
yeah,
with you on that.
unless I go back to the broadcasts on that night and listen to every moment of each broadcast to figure out, to determine if it was a broadcast or if it was actually
Well,
something
it comes
paranormal.
through like you're changing the channels and you hear the bleed through happen, and then you just hear a random thing. And to me, it's like, I don't know. It's kind of like if you ever seen Transformers and you know Bumblebee, the car that has to talk by using the radio. And he can only do like clips of movie scenes and things that usually are already on the airwaves. And I'm like, that's kind of what it sounds like to me. It just kind of sounds like it's, and I don't know if that's, I've heard people say it's how they communicate, but to me, I'm just like, I don't know. That one's a little bit more like less evidence based. That's kind of like, yeah, it could possibly be a radio channel 100%.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I remember I was, as I say, the one investigator was just in love with her ghost box. So we're sitting in a dark room and it bleeps out something and it sounds like part of a song, you know, because it's a radio station. And she's like, no, it said Mary Jane and it wasn't part of a song. I'm like, it was totally part of a song. I heard the music.
That ghost is singing Heart over there, singing Crazy on You.
There you go. Yeah. So that would be a ghost I'd like to meet, actually.
Exactly.
So, I love Heart.
I do too.
But yeah.
Um, I have to ask about when it comes to a reliable or one maybe tradition you have specifically when you go on an investigation. Do you carry a charm or do you have anything like that?
Yeah. I didn't used to. And then I went on an investigation one time and I came home and something followed me. So, and it's happened a couple of times now. Luckily they didn't stay long, but I've the paranormal phenomena has kicked up after investigations. So I was talking with another investigator, really knowledgeable man, and he said, well, what are you doing? Are you saying a prayer? Are you throwing out salt? Or what charms are you wearing? I'm like, oh, I'm not doing any of that. He's like, are you insane? he's, he's like, would you open your door to a murderer and expect nothing to go wrong? Basically, I'm like, oh, I never really thought about that. But I didn't have faith in that kind of thing, so I didn't employ it. Now, whether I believe in it or not, I've got it on. I've got my charm, my religious charm on. I've got the black stone. I never remember what it's called, but it's supposed to keep you safe from and bad energies. One thing that I did, and we use this all the time, is the old folklore is that spirits and things that go bump in the night don't like iron for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So I went on Etsy and I found an ironsmith, a blacksmith that made Celtic like iron bracelets. And so now when I go on an investigation, I've got my 2 Celtic iron bracelets on. And ironically enough, anytime things do kick up around my own home, I just clap a bracelet on everyone in the house. So, and it usually it works.
That's smart.
So yeah. So as I say, I don't necessarily know if I have faith in them, but if it works and it keeps you safe, then by all means, why wouldn't you?
Now, since you started writing about it as well, too, I mean, have you faced a lot of people that have come to you with their own experiences, not places to investigate, but just more people are open to talk about it around you. Obviously, if you write about it, people know what your belief is in it, so then they can just openly express their own opinions. Because for me, I like to talk about ghost stuff, but it's hard to strike that up in a conversation where it's like, hey, by the way, did you have any paranormal experiences in your life? And then people are like, what? And I'm just like, I don't know.
That was random.
I'm like, most people are asking me my politics. You're asking me about my paranormal experience.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we did after I gave up the paranormal conventions, I decided to stay local. So we did Dover Days this year, and it was wonderful because we set up a booth out at Dover Days, hung a big sign, and people were just coming out of the woodwork with great stories. In fact, I got to follow up on a few of them because I write about them. I'll take the better ones and do a blog article about them. So yeah, it was wonderful because I was hearing some great ones, really great stories. So, and I love a good ghost story. I mean, that's kind of what got me into this. As you say, I can't investigate each and every one of them, obviously, but it's still, I mean, anecdotal evidence is, when you build up enough of it, it can be a very powerful thing as well, because you're getting a real taste, a real flavor for what's actually going on in the
And
paranormal.
appreciative of you giving me the time to do my podcast. I'm happy there's someone out there like yourself that's actually investigating this stuff as well too, and willing to speak about it too. It's not. I know that subject. I mean, over the past couple of years, it seems like it's been talked about a little bit more. Which is, I'm glad there's an openness to it, but I love hearing about it. I don't know if you ever remember that show Coast to Coast AM.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
That's what I try and spin mine off of. I was like, I love that show so much. Art Bell's old show with they're calling people up. I was like, that's what got people through their middle of the night drives sometimes, was listening to that. And I think everyone has that UFO paranormal something belief in there. And especially we see it trending a lot more now. I'm happy that someone like yourself was willing to talk with me about it a little bit. But is there a place where people can find your books and any other links you'd like to promote, your website and your team's page?
Absolutely. We have our website is DelawareParanormal.org. Again, that's DelawareParanormal.org. The books are available on the website, as well as our merch. We've got a bunch of really cool t-shirts. And then also it's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble as well. So if you buy it from me, though, I'll sign it and then send it to you. So
well, I'm going to link all your links in the description. Rob, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.